Good afternoon. My name is Lucan Wei. I am professor of political science at the University of Toronto and the co-director of the Petro Yatsik program for the study of Ukraine. Ukraine's success on the battlefield really has hinged on extensive Western support, which has held up, I think, much more than people expected. But the question remains, how much more can we expect, and will sort of Ukraine fatigue set in at some point? So to discuss these issues, we have a number of experts. First, from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, we have Milada Vachudova, who specializes in European politics and has written, I think, the sort of, in my mind at least, the definitive text on the initial wave of European Union expansion in 2005, a really wonderful book. Next, we have Vladimir Dubovic, who's a visiting professor at Tufts. He is also a non-resident scholar at the Petro Yatsik program for the study of Ukraine here in Toronto. He's here virtually. And he, in his normal life or his pre-war life, is an associate professor, Department of International Relations, director, Center for International Studies at Odessa Mechnikov National University. And his areas of expertise are on Ukraine, transatlantic relations, Black Sea security, and security studies. Next, from American University, we have Jim Goldgeier, who is a professor of international relations at American University and is currently a visiting scholar in snowy California. Figure that out. He's written a number of books on U.S. foreign policy towards Russia, NATO expansion, and the like. Next, we have Pavel Zerka, who's a policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. He's the lead ESFR analyst on European public opinion and also works a lot on French and Polish relations in the EU. Last but not least, we have Marcus Kem, who's a senior fellow at the German Institute for International Security and Security Affairs. Since 2012, he's an adjunct professor at the Department of Political Science, University of Zurich, and guest lecturer at the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin. It's really wonderful to have you here. Milada has to leave early, so we're going to start with her. Milada, so we had you here about, I think, 9 months ago on a panel on the EU. You and the other panelists were quite disappointed in the European reaction, particularly by Macron and Scholz on the lack of the aid from Germany and France. So in that time, has your opinion changed, or what's your assessment overall? I can't hear you.
Thank you, Lucan. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a missed opportunity. I think everyone is, it is great to see France and Germany finally delivering the weapons, some of the weapons that should have been delivered 6 months, 8 months, 9 months ago. And it's certainly the case that both Macron and Scholz seem to have come around to realizing that this war can really only end with a Ukrainian victory on the battlefield. But they've been very slow to realize that. And that has had a huge cost, right? Not just to the war on the ground, making it longer, more people dying, more civilians killed and cities destroyed, but it's also had a cost for EU foreign policy, because here, I think France and Germany had a chance to lead Europe in something extraordinary, and instead they left the leadership. I've seen leadership from von der Leyen, from others in the EU institutions and from other governments, but not from Scholz and Macron. And it's a missed opportunity, because this was a moment where I think EU foreign policy could and still can, I think, be kind of supercharged in a positive way. But I'm afraid that we're going to be drawing analogies to what happened in Bosnia in the 1990s, where the European Union refused to do what needed to be done, kept trying to find another way and negotiate here, negotiated there, with huge costs on the ground. But it's not all, there's a lot of positive news as well, in the sense that we have elections in Estonia and the Czech Republic, which show the strong support for very pro-Ukrainian politicians in the EU. And we see support across the EU, both from, citizens supporting aid to Ukraine, including military aid, and also trust in EU institutions is higher than it's been in a long time, and that's a positive.
That's great. Thank you. Marcus, those who look at Germans' behavior, it's always, to me at least, a little bit puzzling. They initially, talk about red lines and, unwilling to sort of, we don't want to send lethal weapons, we don't want to send tanks. Then there's tremendous international pressure, and then it seems like the German government is forced to change, if gradually. It seems like a similar pattern across the last year of the war. Can you talk a little bit about, help us understand the mentality of the current government and the sort of pressures they're facing? I mean, what explains this pattern of behavior? What if they're going to do the right thing? Why does it take them so long, essentially? Right.
I have to admit, I give advice to the German government, but sometimes I don't understand the German government. So I'm one of them being puzzled a little bit. But maybe I try to defend the German policy a little bit, or maybe at least explain it a little bit. I think Germany has gone a long way, and from my point of view, the glass is more half full than half empty. I mean, you should keep in mind, Germany has become, over the last 30 years, a more or less totally anti-militaristic pacifist society. And therefore, the February 24th was a huge wake-up call. Not so much for the political elites, certain parts of them, the Social Democrats, have been woken up, but for the wider public, which has used to an environment which has been quite benign, quite friendly. Everybody has been talking about the peace dividend. Everybody has been talking about that we're only encircled by friends. And given this environment, I think the German government has gone quite a long way. Let me make 3 quick points, or 3 illustrations. The first one, what does it mean, Zeitwende, the turning point, the dawning of a new era, which everybody uses the word Zeitwende. First of all, it's a political paradigm shift. A lot of political foreign policy paradigms have gone out of the window. That you, for example, that you have to organize European security together with Russia. Nobody emphasizes this anymore. Change through rapprochement, that we can change Russia in a good way according to our own standards. Nobody's assuming this anymore. Second part of the Zeitwende is institutional one. Given the huge amount of US leadership and the US example, I think the German foreign policy, and particularly the security policy, is more transatlantic than ever in the last 30 years. Nobody's talking about strategic autonomy of Europe anymore in the name. Everybody's happy that the US is so committed to European security and expects this to be the case for the years to come. And the third illustration is a financial one. Third dimension of the Zeitwende is a financial one. And the 100 billion special purpose vehicle for the German armed forces to make them fit for the future, and a recommitment to spend 2% of the GDP for security and defense. At the end of the last year, we have been at 1.33%, so there's a long way to go. But I think the glass is more than half full. However, I fully understand that there's disappointment, because in my view, there's a problem with communication. If you take the clear numbers, Germany is exactly on par with Poland in terms of military arms procurement or delivery for Ukraine. Both have spent 2.4 billion euros so far. So everybody is applauding Poland, but nobody's applauding Germany, which has to do with the in my view, terrible communication. And so far as Germany always starts with, we express our solidarity, and one part of our solidarity is provide weapons to Ukraine. But then immediately the bureaucratic nitty-gritty starts. What's about training? What's about equipment? What's about how do we get the weapons to Ukraine, and so on. So at the end of the day, the Ukrainians and other countries get the impression that it's not an expression of solidarity, that we're simply shying away. But again, I think Germany has come a long way, and to a certain degree, Germany has proven leadership. my final point, my criticism for the German government is not so much that it's hesitant, that it's slow, but not so much, but more that it's strategic, not clear what we Germans want to accomplish for the Ukraine. The German chancellor always tries away to use the word victory for Ukraine. He sticks with the term Ukraine may not lose, whatever that means. And he's quite silent in terms of security guarantees. He's quite silent about the final status quo, what should be accomplished. And this is, in my view, the bigger point of criticism towards the German government. Thank you.
So I turn to you, Pavel. Can you talk about Macron's evolution since the beginning of the war and sort of?
I can, but although you must know that I am a Polish guy living in Paris.
Okay, yeah. So you first respond to the.
I'm tempted to comment.
Please respond. So it's yeah.
In a way, I feel this entire discussion is a little bit embarrassing because we are trying to explain whether countries are doing enough or not enough. But perhaps this is an unavoidable discussion. And in Europe, this is largely what the media are commenting, whether which country is on the right side and which one is on the wrong side. And unfortunately, in such discussions, there are plenty of stereotypes that you can easily base your analysis on. And I feel that I feel very strangely in that position, but I am a Polish guy right now who might need to defend a little bit the criticism vis-a-vis France, because similarly to what Markus said about Germany, I feel that there is a glass half full. Sorry, my phone. Glass half full element to it, and therefore it is not helpful if we base our analysis of France only on the stereotypes such as whether sorry, problems with my phone. So it's not helpful if we just allow our stereotypes to get confirmed. Of course, many of those stereotypes are justified. So Macron is the politician who, after the annexation of Crimea, tried to woo Vladimir Putin, invited him to Brégançon, and was criticizing NATO, saying that there is that this institution does not deliver anymore. And immediately when the war started, and when we saw Emmanuel Macron trying to talk to Vladimir Putin just before the eruption of just before the invasion and afterwards as well, this was largely understood through the prism of those previous stereotypes, as if France was the soft underbelly of European solidarity with Ukraine, as if it was the country that would always look for an arrangement with Moscow, either because it's fascinated with the Russian culture or because there are industrial interests involved. And again, some of that criticism might be justified because also within the various there are variety of interests within France, and some industrial interests in maintaining contacts with Russia are surely there. But if we stop ourselves and looking only at that stereotype, we might lose from our side important developments that have happened in France. And by this I mean that the fact that the French approach towards Russia has shifted already before this invasion started, and largely because of other reasons, because Paris realized what Russia was doing in Africa, and where they suddenly became on opposite sides. Then also,
can you expand on that, Bet? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mostly mean Wagner Group, which is Moscow related, and which in Mali was staging opposition vis-a-vis French forces, which were trying to stabilize the situation in this and several other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. France also, under Macron, and in reaction to the invasion in February 2022, boosted its military presence in the NATO's eastern flank, in Romania, Estonia, Latvia. And it is it not only demonstrates the importance that Macron and France attribute to developments in the East right now, but also it's important because they are doing it within NATO, and in this sense they are largely modifying their previous position where they had hesitation about NATO's future role. And right now, when they talk about European sovereignty, they largely underline that they largely mean it to be developed in compatibility with NATO. They position themselves as a driving force for a compatibility between EU and NATO, and I think that this is a very important development. Also, France's military support for Ukraine might be very sorry. It's an afternoon in Paris, so there are my children, my mother calling. It's
Beautiful.
It's not like during the day. It's a different moment of the day. That's why sometimes difficult to concentrate. But I will do my best. So the military support that France has provided for Ukraine might have been judged limited, but it has been useful when it came. So, for example, I mean Caesars, the Howitzers, that proved crucial in the counteroffensive in Donbass. And right now, it seems that if any country might be able to provide Ukraine with military aircraft, that might also be France. Although, of course, that is perhaps long way to go, but still, even Macron confirms that is on the cards. And then, when it comes to Macron's frequent calls with Putin, which stopped half a year ago, but still there were several of them over the course of the first half a year of that invasion. We now know that Macron coordinated those with President Zelensky, and also in a way we can understand that he simply wanted Europe to also have a foot in the door in case there were any opportunity for peace negotiations, so that such negotiations are not happening without Europe being involved, European Union being involved, with just the US, perhaps Turkey or China, and the two countries that are fighting, or one is invading the other one. And finally, I already mentioned the fact that France has revisited its approach to NATO, and this is an important development. It is also the one country in Europe which is reminding the rest of Europeans about the importance of European strategic autonomy. And it's also an argument that it's hard to disagree with. Of course, you might conclude that this war has rather showed the importance of relying on NATO and Americans for European security. But at the same time, the instability of the political situation in the US, the fact that we don't know to what extent we might be able to rely on the next American administration, makes it all the more urgent for Europeans to remember about the need to invest in their own military corporation, military industrial base, etc. And I think that this is an important message that France has for the rest of Europe, and that other European countries should also listen to. Unfortunately, this is not something that my country of origin, Poland, is currently most interested in, because from the perspective of Poland, the war has confirmed that Germany, France are not to be trusted, and Poland can feel vindicated in its moral superiority right now, which is largely justified, but very impractical.
Milada, I'm going to get to, don't worry, Volodya and Jim, I'm going to get to you. Milada has to leave. So I just wanted, are you convinced, Milada?
Well, I just have a few points to make about France and one on Germany. So about France, first of all, I don't think the accusation was that Macron had some special like commercial interests that were driving with his conversations with Putin. It's more the traditional geopolitical game that France has been playing since World War II, if not before, to try to establish itself as a separate pillar, not taking orders from the United States, kind of a third pillar that's able to negotiate with Moscow. And in the history of this, it hasn't really gone well for France. And so it was interesting to see Macron basically trying to do that again. And the goal is to amplify French foreign policy, to amplify France's position, on the world stage, which leads to my second point, that if France wanted to amplify its position on the world stage, it could have done that by leading the European Union in arming Ukraine and helping Ukraine. And it absolutely abdicated that leadership position. And as it has done previously in its history, going back to 1954, when it suggested the European army and then voted it down. And so it was, typical of the French, but not the finest hour. And finally, it is true that French companies have been amongst the worst, if not the worst, in not withdrawing from Russia. So there is an element of that. When it comes to Germany, I agreed with everything that Marcus said, and there's no question that over the last year, German policy, German public opinion, there has been a transformation and vis-a-vis pacifism and the role of Germany in the EU and in NATO, the role of the German military. But there are a couple of things that have to be pointed out. First, Germany was among the top 3 exporter of arms to Russia, not just before 2014, but after 2014. So huge amounts of money going into German hands, selling arms to Putin. Second, I don't think one of the problems with the debate in Germany is that Germans have not come around to admitting that they made a huge, colossal mistake in allowing Nord Stream 1 and 2 to pump corruption directly into the SPD and the CDU. Germans don't like to think of themselves as having been corrupt, but this was corruption. And as my Greek friends like to point out, when Greece had a bit of a problem, and with the financial crisis, the Germans were first to say, hey, you made a mistake, you better admit it, and you better pay the consequences. Well, now I think Germany, because of its arms exports and because of the huge amount of money it has put into the Kremlin's coffers by buying energy, even though it was warned, even consistently by the US administrations and others, not to do this. So I think this kind of realization that this was a fundamental mistake, that debate still has a way to go. Thank you so much.
Do you think that, sticking on Germany, do we think that this is a kind of a permanent shift in German relations to Moscow? I mean, it is striking when one looks at the energy dependence on Russia, how quickly, it declined. And so I'm wondering whether you think this, this is sort of one of these, major historical inflection points and will sort of never go back, or do you think it's, if there's peace in Ukraine, that could go back? Marcus?
Difficult to say. I could imagine, or maybe the core of my answer would be, it depends on what happens in Ukraine. I could imagine a scenario in which we would have peace of some kind in Ukraine in 6 weeks from now. And that would fuel a debate here in Germany about, do we really have to spend 100 billion euro on defense? Is it really, can't we go back to square one in our relationship with Russia? Not totally. I think the question of energy dependence is off the table. We've gone too far in redirecting the energy flows. But politically, I could identify certain parts of the political spectrum on the extreme left, on the extreme right, certain parts of the Social Democrats which would be happy to return to some kind of accommodationist foreign policy towards Russia. There won't be a total return to German Russia policy for the last 30 years, but however, more accommodationist than we would expect it to be today.
Okay. So, Jim, let's turn to the United States. The United States is obviously, the most important supplier of military assistance to Ukraine. Can you, for those of us who very much support military assistance to Ukraine, it's obviously quite worrying that there's at least a large faction in the Republican Party that is, feels very pro-Russian or Russophile and very opposed to support to Ukraine. I mean, how worried are you about the Republican Party? And can you just sort of describe the situation in the Republican Party right now in regards to Ukraine?
Well, let's start with the good news first. I think that, keep in mind, like this administration did not want to be spending its time on Europe when it came in. I mean, it came into office wanting to focus on China and building on the previous comments, right? I mean, it was needed in Europe because Europe remains so dependent on the United States for security. And I don't think that is really healthy in the long run, but there you have it. The administration did have months to prepare for what it was going to do on February 24th. They knew by November of 2021 what was going to happen. So they were ready on February 24th. They tried to get everybody else ready as well. It also turns out it's an administration with a tremendous background in transatlantic relations. I mean, you started with the president. I mean, President Biden, decades in the Senate, his time as vice president. I mean, he was certainly ready for this moment. And we should point out, I mean, he has doubled down on this, right? He went to Kyiv. I mean, like he owns the response of the United States to try to support Ukraine in an effort to hopefully defeat the Russians, but, at least weaken Russia significantly so that it can't do this again, as Secretary Austin explained last spring as a major goal of US policy. It's also been a largely bipartisan policy. There's been tremendous Republican support for the US effort, both on Capitol Hill and especially in the Senate. And we saw Senator McConnell, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, go to the Munich Security Conference as a way, with a large delegation, as a way of demonstrating that in his view, there's still plenty of Republican support for this war. And by and large, the public opinion polling, the Republican support is softer than the support among the Democrats. It's, I mean, that's largely the beating that, NATO has taken from Trump over the last 6-7 years. And Trump's attitudes towards Putin and towards Russia. The United States response would have been very different if Donald Trump had been president. So I think, we should all be grateful that we had a different administration here for this moment. So the question is, I think there are two questions. One is the Republicans in the House. This is where you see much more of the opposition, and they've sort of got, these key talking points. Why are we worried about the Ukrainian border when we should be worried about the American southern border? Why are we, sending this money and support to Ukraine? We should be focused on the United States. The train derailment in East Palestine and Ohio, and the need for that community to have support. And it's just an easy thing to say, why are we doing this for these people? We need to do this for our people. So, and you're going to see that continue. I think that it's not going to have an enormous effect in 2023. The question will be 2024. You are going to have another presidential election season. All indications are President Biden's going to run for re-election. And again, he's made this his his thing, that he's going to support Ukraine to enable it to be successful against the Russian military. But it will be more challenging in 2024. And we don't know yet, of course, who's going to emerge as the Republican nominee. But the front runners, Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, are both a lot softer on, U.S. support for Ukraine than President Biden. And, they have a very different approach toward the war. The one Republican, probably the Republican who's been sort of the most still sort of tough on Russia and trying to carve out a space for Biden administration hasn't done enough, or it was too weak, or it was seen as too weak, and the Afghanistan withdrawal led Putin to miscalculate, all that kind of stuff. Nikki Haley, who's running but hasn't really caught fire. There is talk she could potentially be a vice presidential candidate for the Republican nominee. Maybe she could have some influence over the position, but I would worry about 2024. The last thing I'll just say is the public opinion polling in 2022 demonstrated that the strong U.S. bipartisan support seemed to stem largely from a sense that American support was helping Ukraine win. And if there's a sense that support that Ukraine is not winning, that may be a problem. And I think there are a lot of people who think that Ukraine, at whatever point in the next few months, really goes on a counteroffensive against the Russians. This is their big moment to achieve as much as they can.
Okay, thanks. Volodya, you've been very patient. Thanks. What is it? You wanted to speak to these issues, or you've got a visible tour of the United States, and what's your impression?
Right. Yeah, it's good. It's a good point just to pick up where James has left. I think that there's been a number of issues, obviously, with assistance coming from United States to Ukraine. Well, first of all, I think the United States have done a reasonably good job. I think this administration has handled it pretty much well. I mean, it's not the highest mark that I would give. I wouldn't give them an A, but maybe B, I don't know, B minus something for delays, and I'll get back to it because in Ukraine also the attitude is double-sided. First of all, people are really grateful, and people understand that this support is really our lifeline. Not to mention support not with weapons but with money for Ukrainian economy and so on. But another thing, other side, people are basically saying, well, if only we can get this not tomorrow, let's say yesterday, that would be a big deal. That would really save a lot of lives of the Ukrainian military on the battleground. So, and these two narratives are kind of competing. And sometimes the second one, I mean, the latter, is even overtaken the former. So Ukrainians are really more worried and even angry, like, what are these deliberations are for, what is this delays for, and why we're not giving some of those weapons that we should be given. For instance, right now, I guess the big deal is still long-range missiles that Ukraine would need. More maybe than tanks, and more maybe than the F-16s. I mean, a lot of people say what we really need specifically for this counteroffensive we're planning is this long-range missiles. Because the HIMARS have done their job spectacularly, and Russia wasn't ready, and that allowed Ukraine to do some very big things, in terms of liberating some lands last year. But the HIMARS time is over. Right now Russians are really, acting, being mindful of what HIMARS can do, what kind of damage HIMARS can do. So one problem that is emerging here, of course, is a problem of logistics, frankly, in terms of what do we have in stock, what we don't, the problem of procurement of arms. It's really becoming a major issue in conversation, and I'm hearing it here and there. Like just last week, I was at the symposium at Sam Nunn School, Georgia Tech, and most of the talk was about procurement, how this country, even this country, let alone any other European member of NATO or something, but even this country is running out of things that it can give Ukraine. And how is that even possible? Why no one was getting ready for this big war, of this scale? And how you can actually accelerate it now, what you have to do, because of course right now it's a very heavy focus on military production cycles, but still it will take time. It doesn't happen overnight. So another thing, of course, is that where you have discussions still throughout the first year, and continue to have discussions. It's about escalation versus de-escalation. So that's exactly the main reason for delays that I've been talking about, and we understand that Biden administration is really worried about possible escalation on the part of Russia. But after several times, the red lines have shifted, and there was no escalation really by Russia. I mean, no major escalation, and therefore, I think they decided, okay, let's give some more weapons to Ukraine that we previously decided not to give them. So I think also what is meaningful here is there may be some differences between Kyiv and Washington in terms of seeing the end game of the war. The whole recent activization, as Milada has mentioned before, well, she's gone now, but she said that allies decided to provide for Ukraine's victory. I think it's still the focus and priority is on denying Russia's victory. I don't see necessarily the focus on like Ukraine victory and also what is that victory means. There's a lot of discussion. There is certain disagreements here and there on particular tactical issues, even like on Bakhmut, for instance, for several months already. Americans are basically saying, leave Bakhmut, retreat. You don't need to spend your military there. You're going to need that military for counteroffensive you're planning. And apparently in the recent meeting, General Zaluzhny also had a disagreement with Zelensky himself, where Zaluzhny said, we're going to withdraw, we should withdraw those troops. And Zelensky said, no, Bakhmut, we defend Bakhmut. So there are some disagreements here and there. We understand that the American military is heavily involved in advising Ukrainian military what to do next. In terms of situation here in the US, in conclusion of my first remark is that public opinion worries me a little bit. I mean, there is a trend, undeniable. So far, there's still a little goodwill. We see good numbers, but it's changing. I mean, of course, since last spring, for instance, a lot of people are basically saying, okay, we give Ukraine too much, definitely on the Republican side. And a lot of people are also questioning, like, how long this war will go on. What does it mean as long as it takes? What is it, like 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? Are we going to give them Ukrainians, say, tens of billions of dollars, maybe 110 billions right now over 2 years? We're going to give the same amount of money. And what happens if Ukrainians are still not winning, still not liberating much of their land? The people would say, like, well, it's hopeless. We're giving this money to Ukrainians, but the war is raging and Ukraine is destroyed and so on. As a country, as an economy, as infrastructure. So what are we doing here? So there'll be some discussions here with the public, not just with the administration, but with the public as well, focusing and paying attention. On the Republican side, most finally, for now we're safe because the money has been committed, say half a year, maybe until the fall or something. On the scales all that this administration is spending on Ukraine, this money might be run through quicker than we thought, because the last one was 400 million, but the one previous, just a week earlier, was 2 billion. So I mean, if you do go through this, you can end up without the money. But then there is Lend-Lease, by the way, which hasn't been used with this administration. This is some kind of backup option in case they run out of money committed by the Congress. And then, of course, there could be a vote in the Congress for a new package. And then we'll see, do their Trump wing actually hijack the entire faction in the House or not? What would Speaker McCarthy actually do? Would he listen to his new best friend, Marjorie Taylor Greene, or would he listen to someone else? I'm not worried about Senate. I'm not worried about McConnell and the Senate in general. I worry about the House. And people in Ukraine worried about midterm elections. Of course, luckily for us, they didn't turn the way Trump and his people hoped for. But still, they've got the people, and they're a very noisy bunch. They're very active. They're pushing their agenda. They're trying to hijack the entire faction, and that worries me. And that DeSantis himself, instead of somehow distancing himself from Trump in his position on Russia, he's actually getting closer to Trump. So that worries me too. So the main two candidates right now, as they look like from Republican Party, they're both singing, the tune, which is very well received in Moscow. And whether Nikki Haley or maybe Mike Pence or some others, more of a hawkish side, more of a traditional side, do they have a chance for the 2024? It's not clear right now. It doesn't look like that, but it might change. There might be a new candidate. There's still time. There's still time. So I'm really hoping that this fight will be this fight within the GOP, within the Republican Party, and that everyone else wouldn't just surrender to the Trump wing. For instance, there's a chairman of a House committee, Mr. McCall, who's actually been critical of Mr. Biden for a long time from a different perspective. What James has mentioned, some Republicans are saying Biden is not helping Ukraine as much as they should. So we'll see. We'll see. There's going to be this major fight, but we wouldn't see this fight with our own eyes until the moment comes when the Biden comes to the Congress again for the new massive package of assistance to Ukraine, which might happen in the summer or maybe in the fall, and then we'll see who is voting which way. Because the last major fight, the last major vote was almost a year ago, last spring, and you had 11 senators voting against assistance to Ukraine, and you have 57 members of the House voting against assisting Ukraine. I assume in both houses the numbers would now be much higher, definitely in the House, against supporting Ukraine. But would that be a majority, even in the Republican Party? I don't know. But there are reasons to be worried, but for now we're kind of good to go. Thank you.
Thank you. So you mentioned escalation. I'm just going to throw it open to the rest of you. I mean, what does escalation mean? I mean, in this context, I mean, I oftentimes wonder, at least from the Ukrainian perspective, like how much more bad can it get? And the obvious, answer is nuclear, attack. But it's just not clear to me, what are people afraid of in terms of Russian escalation? Maybe Jim, do you want to answer that?
Well, I mean, I think people are afraid about the use of nuclear weapons, and I mean, I don't think it's likely, and I don't think it really helps Putin to use nuclear weapons. But nobody wants a major nuclear power talking about nuclear use as much as has been talked about over the past year. I mean, it's the language is dangerous. It's irresponsible. It's I mean, this is a country that's engaged in this brutal and illegal war. So there's a lot else, of course, that's been worse. But I think that, I mean, we should note with respect to escalation. I mean, there was the nuclear issue, and then of course there was also, would Putin broaden the war out? I mean, he does seem to recognize the difference between a NATO country and a non-NATO country, and the amount of support that's being provided to a non-NATO country is pretty impressive. But clearly there's a limit, right? NATO troops are not going in to fight the Russians. President Biden's been very clear he's not starting World War III over this, right? That's been his line from the start. A Russian attack on a NATO member country would, I mean, I don't think it would be very wise of Putin to do it, and he seems to recognize that because he's not doing it. He hasn't done it, and it doesn't seem likely that he would. And on the nuclear thing, I think what we don't know two things. One, well, we know the United States has made clear that there would be huge consequences. We don't know what that means. Would that mean that the United States would? I don't think the United States would use nuclear weapons. I hope not, but that there could be attacks on Russian conventional forces or on the sources of this of the nuclear use. So I think you would see a stepped up U.S. engagement. The other thing we don't know is what are the Chinese and Indians telling the Russians. There was a meeting a while back or a phone call between President Xi Jinping and President Biden, and the U.S. readout was that they had agreed on how terrible it would be if Russia used nuclear weapons and that they shouldn't use nuclear weapons. And the Chinese readout of the call was less strong than the U.S. readout. So what exactly they've said, what Xi Jinping has said to Putin, I think for the Chinese and Indians, it wouldn't be particularly good for either of them if the Russians use nuclear weapons. So I think there should be a lot of pressure on Putin not to do it, but he's talked about it, and others around him have talked about it, and so we should take it seriously because it would be a big deal.
Right, absolutely. I mean, on the other hand, it does seem, first of all, I mean, I think it's oftentimes, it's clear that if there were nuclear weapons, it would be on Ukraine, but also that there would be enormous costs for Russia to take that step, and it's not clear at all that that has really any military value. Right. Pavel, I'll go to you. I mean, is there still talk? There's a while talk. I'll get to you, but Pavel has been very patient, and we all get to see his cute kids, which I'm a little disappointed. But is there still talk, fear of escalation in Europe? Would you say?
Yeah. So I'm not an expert in security affairs, but I know quite a bit about European public opinion. And recently at the CFR, we did a major public opinion poll, actually not only in European countries, but also outside, including the US, China, Russia, India, and Turkey. And what we have seen there was a strong Western unity. I mean, between the EU countries, Great Britain, and the US on solidarity with Ukraine. But we have also seen the fact that the West is very much divided from the perspectives of people in India or in Turkey. But we have also seen something which will be the topic of our upcoming paper, based on the same poll, and which is about a strong European, strengthened European solidarity. So when we compare how European public opinions were shaping a year ago with how they are shaping right now, we can clearly see that Europeans are more supportive of Ukraine. My children shouting in another room. That's why I'm laughing. You can explain it by various factors, by the fact that Russia has committed atrocities which are unacceptable for European citizens, that Ukraine has demonstrated an admirable courage in standing against Russian invasion. Thirdly, people started perhaps believing that Ukraine can win this war rather than simply block the invasion, which also might translate into a stronger support. But I believe that there are some other factors which also point out to some possible vulnerabilities. So we have seen that people fear a little bit less right now than they used to in the past, the nuclear element in that war. And also they have lived through the war, they have lived through the winter, which proved to be less difficult economically than they might have feared in the autumn, both when it comes to energy provision, and also when it comes to economic effects of the war on European countries and people's wallets. And that might have made people more supportive and also governments more open in supporting Ukraine. I think this is one of the important elements in the strengthened support of governments of Germany and France, which is clearly seen in the past couple of months. They could have afforded it, also because they have noticed that the public opinion isn't dismayed by the economic consequences of that war, and also because those economic consequences have not been that important yet. But if the moment comes when the threat of the nuclear becomes more important again, that might affect the public opinion negatively. And also if the economic consequences become more palpable, that could also shift the priorities in many people's perceptions, and also that could strengthen the hand of those marginal political groupings. In most European countries, they are marginal. Perhaps in Italy or some southern countries, they are not less marginal and more visible, but still, that such economic problems might strengthen the case for limiting the support for Ukraine because there are more important priorities at home. So these are surely vulnerabilities. We are right now at this seminar discussing what might happen in 2024, but actually I believe that for most people don't have such a long horizon, and there is a huge hope that such a war could end quickly this year, and it's hard to imagine that a strong solidarity could be sustained longer than this year's horizon.
So yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I know that very early in the war, in March or so, me and colleagues who part of the Ukrainian community were very nervous and scared about Ukraine fatigue. But what I'm hearing, at least on the European side, is there's a lot less of it than you might have expected. And certainly, if you look at sort of, you know, French and German position in March of 2022 versus now, it's, you know, as you said, the sort of trajectory is going the opposite way. It's more supportive of Ukraine. Is this your perspective, Marcus? Is there, have we not seen Ukraine fatigue in Germany, or is it like more like, is there kind of elements of the United States where there's sort of, it's kind of bubbling up?
No, it's totally as you mentioned. I'm surprised as well to a certain degree. The most recent public opinion poll, which I have in mind, indicates that more than 50%, 54, 55% around this number still support the course of Olaf Scholz and this government. So more or less, I cannot identify any kind of Ukraine fatigue. Yes, and the margins, some people are expressing concerns about how long will the war last, but at the end of the day, there's still support for the pro-Ukrainian stance of the German government. Which brings me to the escalation question. I would differentiate between the public and the government. In the public, I think 1 year ago, 9 months ago, there was, in particular, the nuclear concern overarching, overwhelming in place. Maybe that has to do with everything which is nuclear is quite contentious here in Germany, even the civilian use of nuclear energy. But after 1 year, we have some more experience with the political use of this nuclear threats. The use of the mentioning of red lines, this threats being used for political purposes. I think what concerns most people here in Germany is something totally different, sub-issue of the Ukrainian war, the migration question. You have to keep in mind we're still coping with a huge wave of migrants of 2015, 2016, the Syrians, the Afghans, the Iraqis, which are still to a certain degree quite poorly accommodated here in Germany. It's quite difficult to find apartments for them, accommodation for them. It's quite a difficult situation. And then on top, you have already 1 million Ukrainian refugees. And this has worked quite well. But imagine a situation in which the Russians really managed to destroy the civilian infrastructure in Ukraine and make Ukraine a really ugly place in which nobody can really live. Then I think people are concerned that maybe two more Ukrainians might come to Germany or to Europe, or even more. And that would be some kind of escalation, to put it this way, at the migration front. And in political circles, it's I think the issue or the question which has been mentioned before, it's not so much nuclear escalation, it's the key question: how long can this war drag on, and how long are we capable and able and willing to sustain our political and in particular the military support for Ukraine? I know you're quite aware about the deplorable status of the German armed forces. There is not much they can spend. There's not so much they can give away to Ukraine, and it's quite difficult to refill the amount of material of the German armed forces which is available to the Ukrainians. And this is a situation I'm really concerned about. Imagine that the war drags on for 1 more year, 2 more years. I think the political support in Germany will continue, but then the question arises: can we simply afford to do this?
So maybe talk a little bit about the migration issue. I mean, you know, 8 million Ukrainians going into Europe. I mean, you know, there are sort of, you know, what might have been. I mean, you know, look. You know, a year ago, you know, I think I even in print, you know, concerned about sort of populism in kind of response to this sort of wave of Ukrainian immigration. I mean, you know, that doesn't seem to have happened. So can you, either you or Pavel, sort of, Marcus, sort of talk about that? Why haven't we seen? I mean, obviously, very different reaction from the Syrian refugee crisis in 2015? I mean, is this what's going on?
I think very, very quickly, I think I totally agree with you. To me, it was a total surprise how supportive and how welcoming Germany has been towards the 1 million Ukrainian refugees which have come to Germany. And that has a variety of reasons compared to the Syria case. In this case, the conflict is quite close in geographical terms. The Ukrainians are closer to us than the Syrians for good or bad reasons in cultural and religious terms. And maybe unlike the Syrian case, which is quite complicated, nobody really understands fully what is going on in Syria. I think here the question, who's the bad guy and who are the good guys, it's quite clear. And so, to my surprise, the German society has been quite welcoming to the Ukrainian refugees, particularly in Berlin. I personally know dozens of people who have hosted and continue to host Ukrainians in the private homes, and it's exactly as you said. Right-wing populism has not been fueled by these events, and this is quite a surprise. But again, this is status quo, March 2023, and I wouldn't bet on the future in this regard.
If I can just add to it, that it might have been easy. I was also surprised by the easiness with which European countries have dealt with the challenge of hosting so many refugees and migrants. I can also explain that by some cultural affinity. Also, the fact that the Ukrainian diaspora in many countries, especially in Poland, but I believe also in Germany, was already strong before that invasion, and therefore it was easier to organize everything. Plus, also, these are mostly women and children, which normally poses much less of a difficulty from the acceptance point of view, although it has an uneven cost for the public services. And this is a discussion which in some places in Poland has started, mostly due to the fact that the government has largely left the burden of hosting refugees on the shoulders of municipalities who have not been provided with additional funding, whereas accepting so many refugees meant that there are rising costs for hospitals, for the education, etc. Still, I am super surprised by the fact that it has went so smoothly. And as far as I know, talking to people who for many years have been looking at Polish perceptions of people from various countries, including on Ukrainians, they notice a very important change of perception. So before the invasion, there were many Ukrainians living in Poland, but there was some room for discrimination. Whereas after the last year's invasion, like perhaps largely because we have clearly seen who is the invader and who is the victim, it's not just the fact that so many people have been hosted, but also the perceptions have apparently improved very strongly among the general population vis-a-vis people from Ukraine, which is an important event in the history of those two countries as well.
Interesting. Volodya, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, on the migration issue or
on what escalation, migration, or whatever you.
Yeah, I thought that maybe on escalation. Well, what Jim has said, much what I would have said as either. So I think the escalation can work both ways. I mean, for instance, last summer, the Biden administration tried to apparently to give Putin an opportunity to save face and give him some off ramp. So some things were not provided. Neither long-range missiles, not even HIMARS. And how Putin responded, he escalated even more. He doubled down. He announced the referenda, he announced the annexations, then he announced mobilization and did mobilization. So I think there was a big teaching moment right there. So actually, with a guy like Putin, who is a typical bully, you don't show weakness. You don't give him any attempt to escalate by showing your weakness. So you actually show him strength, and that's how he probably de-escalate. Also, with regard to what they used on Ukraine, they're pretty much up to the ceiling. Of course, they can send more missiles, and the question then actually is how many more they have left. Can they produce new missiles, or are they running out of them? But they can actually, of course, double down on hitting power stations or maybe even apartment buildings in Ukraine. But it's not going to give them any benefit in this war, because on the contrary, it even consolidates Ukrainian even more. If someone in Kremlin apparently thought that taking away those power stations and making Ukraine living in the colder times, without electricity and everything, hitting in the middle of winter would somehow make people go to the streets to demand Zelensky sign a peace treaty with Russia. I mean, that just tells us again how little they know about Ukraine, and Ukrainians in Russia never cared too much. They cared to have Ukraine under their control, yes, sphere of their influence, yes, but not to understand what really motivates, what drives Ukrainians. And with nuclear weapons, I think there's been some moment of worry, but now people not necessarily relaxed, but not dismissing it. But they think there's not very realistic chance for them to use them against Ukraine for a number of reasons. First of all, I think threatening to use them would actually be more beneficial to him, Putin, than actually use them. Second is on the battleground. If you use them, you're not gonna win the war. No, the Ukrainian army wouldn't stop. So battleground advantages are very, not precise, not clear for him. And finally, you're going to lose a lot of people who kind of sitting on the fence and neutral, and including those Chinese and Indians and actually global South. I mean, if Russians use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, then Russia is completely isolated. Then they wouldn't have any, even like six countries voting with them in United Nations, would be none, would be zero. So not to mention, of course, that apparently was communicated to him that there will be a conventional strike with Russian troops in Ukraine by NATO countries if that to happen. But so we're not dismissing it, but right now I think it's pretty much up to the ceiling of what he can realistically, pragmatically speaking, escalate. But then, of course, we thought of Putin for a number of years that he's a rational player, but now he's unhinged. He's much more irrational. So you never know.
Absolutely. Okay, so anybody else have some final words, or Jim or anybody?
Well, just the only thing I would just say, because I don't think this war is going to end anytime soon, and I actually don't think there is going to be a formal peace settlement to this war. The question, from a U.S. standpoint, this administration would like to be in a position where they can provide Ukraine with long-term assistance to help it defend itself against future Russian aggression. So, wherever the fighting if the fighting stops and there's ceasefire, disengagement, like I said, I don't think there's going to be a formal peace settlement. But Russia remains a threat. I mean, even if you stopped it, they can come back later. So this administration wants to be in a situation where it can provide Ukraine with what it needs to defend itself long term. And the question is, will there be that kind of commitment regardless of who wins the presidency in the US in 2024? I don't think we know. Right.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Pavel. Thank you, Volodya. And thank you to Milada, who had to leave for another thing. And so next week here, we're going to be having a discussion on deportation of Ukrainians, forced deportation of Ukrainians by the Russian government. So hopefully we'll see you there. So thank you very much, and see you later. Bye-bye.